Hey guys, welcome to the first edition of Platitude. Let's see if we can actually do this. I wanted this to be all fancy with cool effects and whatnot, but well, my skills are not quite there yet, but I'm working on them. So now today we're going to discuss the reaction that occurs when you drop a newly emancipated voting African American population in a Caucasian-dominated power structure. And for our particular story, we are going to start during Reconstruction. Now, during Reconstruction, there was major white resistance to what was called radical rule, and it quickly turned violent. Almost overnight, these white supremacist terrorist groups popped out of nowhere. Groups like the Knights of the White Camellia, the White League, and most notably, of course, the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan. So these guys would use fear tactics, intimidation, and violence in an effort to prevent African Americans from using their newly codified 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment rights. The most notable event, in my opinion, happened in Colfax, Louisiana, and this happened in 1873, and what occurred is a bunch of, white supremacist guys, some KKK guys, they got together and they decided that they were really upset with the latest election results. And they were getting angrier and angrier, and then they saw a large group of African American Republicans walking down the street. And so they're going to use mob violence and mob justice, and they will attack them and end up killing 81 African Americans, making it the bloodiest race riot in Reconstruction era. Now the crazy part, the part that I find hilarious in a very sarcastic kind of way, is that all of this happened on Easter Sunday. Now the KKK, they're very fundamental religious zealots almost, and they're big believers in the Protestant religion and the Protestant denomination. And so on Easter Sunday, they take the time to celebrate the resurrection of Christ in the morning and love and peace and whatever. And then in the afternoon, they're like, yeah, let's get together and kill people. This sounds like a great idea. So I guess that's what racism and hatred does. It makes you look ignorant and violent and horrible. Okay, so Klan violence and intimidation will have a major effect on the balance of political power in the South. White domination of the political arena will once again enable the repression of African Americans. Because of this, local governments will institute a set of laws called Jim Crow. These laws would segregate African Americans in all aspects of life, just so you know. The term Jim Crow is a pejorative reference to a performance in the 1830s. So what would happen is this white guy had like a traveling show, and he would do little skits. And one of the little skits that he would do would be a skit called Jump Jim Crow. And he would dress up in blackface, and which, by the way, if you don't know what blackface is, essentially it's when a white person takes black shoe polish and they color their face in a horrible rendition and caricature of African American features. It's awful. So, and it will stick around for a long time. But the routine, basically, this song, Jump Jim Crow, portrays a black man who is stupid and lazy and whose only concerns were eating, sleeping, and flirting with pretty ladies, because African American men were seen as Lotharios. So this was the perception of the time, and to call these laws Jim Crow was just an additional way to perpetuate the myth that African Americans were too lazy or too stupid or worthless, and they couldn't follow the same laws and be equal. Like, it was impossible for them. So when really these laws were rooted in resentment and fear of African American economic stability and political influence. And they will use these laws to limit African American political, economic, and social growth. Now, unfortunately for these people, because the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments couldn't, well, it prevented them from directly limiting their rights. So technically, they had to make sure that they were free and that they had the rights of a citizen and that they were voting or were able to vote. But they had to find their way around that. And so what they did is they created within the Jim Crow system, they created what's called de jure segregation and de facto segregation. Now, de jure segregation are those things that are written into law. Now, these are going to be things like the grandfather clause, or poll taxes, or literacy tests. That these three things are de jure segregation that will prevent African Americans from utilizing their 15th Amendment right to vote. Then, of course, there's de facto segregation. It just is because it is. It's custom. So things like African Americans have to sit at a separate counter. African Americans have to walk on a separate side of the street, and they can't talk to white women, and they can't, interact on a regular basis with Caucasian Americans. Now, that being said, what they're going to actually try and make de facto segregation de jure segregation. And while all of those limitations, the grandfather clause and the poll tax and whatnot, are restricting their political influence, at the same time, they're trying to socially segregate them. And by making it law, they're going to actually go after the rail lines first. Now, states began requiring African Americans to ride in separate passenger cars on the rail lines. But in 1896, this idea is going to be challenged by a man named Homer Plessy, who refused to leave a whites-only passenger car and was convicted of violating Louisiana state law that prohibited African Americans and whites from sharing public space. Now, the Supreme Court, here's the crazy thing. Let's go back to Homer Plessy really quickly. So Homer Plessy is this guy. He was 1/8 African American, which made him very light-skinned, which is how he was able to actually purchase a first-class ticket in a whites-only passenger car. So when they found out that he had African-American blood in him, and they came to him and they said, "You have to move," and he said, "No way. I paid for a first-class ticket. This is the only first class there is. I'm staying." And so that's what they did, is they arrested him. Now, back to the Supreme Court, because they arrested him, they convicted him, and Homer Plessy and his lawyers are going to appeal all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is going to side with the state against Plessy, saying that states had the right to create laws to legally separate or segregate race. Now, here's another interesting fact. There was one dissenting vote, and it came from a Supreme Court justice who used to own slaves. In fact, I'm pretty sure he was the only one that did, and who said that this ruling for this idea of separate but equal would sow the seeds for race hate under the sanction of law. And guess what? He was right. This court case will mark a turning point in race relations, as it provided federal sanction of Jim Crow laws. The idea of separate but equal was legitimized and spread to every area of Southern life, including schools, restaurants, hospitals, places of employment. Widespread violence will accompany Jim Crow, in which reported lynchings in the U.S. will average 188 a year. Average. And like 90% of them are happening in the South over race. That's crazy. That is crazy. So all of this will combine, this segregation, the intimidation, and, well, quite frankly, the extermination. It will become a way of life in the South and will go virtually unchallenged for 50 years. Okay, so that's KKK Part 1, right? In the 1920s and again in the 1950s, the Klan will reemerge under the platform of 100% Americanism. This renewed version of the Klan was determined to protect America from not only African Americans, but anyone who was not white and fundamentalist Protestant. So this is going to include Roman Catholics, Jews, immigrants, Hispanics, Asians, of course African Americans, you name it, they had a drop of color in their skin at all. You were in trouble. I mean, this new Klan is going to appeal, the bigger problem is this new Klan, because of their much more open platform of hate, is going to appeal to more than just the white supremacists in the South. And so the KKK is going to spread nationwide. Nationwide. They're going to hit their peak membership of 4 million members nationwide. Thankfully, their membership will dwindle quickly to 100,000 people nationwide and will continue to fall and fall and fall. Currently, I think there are about 9,000 members for just the original KKK, but now we have a whole bunch of different little sects like neo-Nazism and right, skinheads, you name it, and it's kind of crazy, right? Because essentially what the KKK has done in its original form is it created a legacy of bigotry and intolerance. And all of this is fed on this idea of this fear and hatred of something that they don't know, because something that's different than them. And it still hasn't disappeared. And it's unfortunate. All right, thanks, guys. I'll see you guys later.